Good evening, everyone. I'm Jennifer Maddox. I'm the coordinator of the Kentucky Great Writers Series at the Carnegie Center. And I would like to welcome you to our special edition reading of the Kentucky Great Writers Series. This series features authors who either live in Kentucky now or have lived in Kentucky in the past and have one or more literary works of high literary quality. Before we begin our readings, I'd like to introduce you to what's coming up at the Carnegie Center and let you know what you can expect for tonight. From tonight. Through at least the summer, you'll find Carnegie Center writing classes and events online, including our writing workshops, mentoring, a new Kentucky Black Writers Collaborative, and much more. We're now accepting applications for the Carnegie Center Author Academy, which will begin in the fall. And I'm excited to tell you all that our Books in Progress conference will be virtual. It will be June 4th through 6th. It will feature the award-winning poet Ada Limon as our keynote speaker. And you can learn more about these and other things at carnegiecenterlex.org. Now, tonight's event is sponsored by the Wrightsville Cook Foundation, the Kentucky Arts Council, Lex Arts, and also WUKY. And we'd also like to give a special thanks to Nate's Coffee, which if we were in the building, they would be serving us some of their wonderful brew. Now, after all three of the authors have read tonight, you'll get a chance to ask questions of the authors. And actually, you could do that at any time by leaving your question in the Q&A feature of the Zoom call. That's for our viewing audience, of course, and we'll get to those questions at the end. The authors won't be reading those or answering those during the readings. Now, some of our staff, actually, one of the writers on staff, Brittany, is going to be posting some links in our chat window where you can buy books from these authors. And we sure hope that you'll show your support by buying them, not just so that you could support the authors, but also when you go to the bookshop.org page where Brittany will be giving you the link, a portion of that purchase will go to the Carnegie Center and a portion of it will go to independent bookstores at no additional cost to you, which is part of the great benefit of using bookshop.org. And if you're listening at home, our direct page is www.bookshop.org/shop/Carnegie Center. Now, tonight's event is being recorded and it will be rebroadcast on Facebook and YouTube, and then also later on the radio on 91.3 WUKY Lexington. And now we'll begin our very first special edition reading of the Kentucky Great Writers Series. Now, what makes tonight's reading special is that all three of the readers tonight were part of an event that has become legendary at the Carnegie Center, February 7th, 2012. And, it was a really unusual night for us because Florida was playing against UK at a home basketball game right down the street a couple of blocks away. And, cars lined the streets in every available parking space. People were having to walk a long way just to get to our building. And the Carnegie Center was hosting a reading. And of course, the lineup, Nikki Finney, Ed McClanahan, and Bobbie Ann Mason. And our MC that night was Litha Kendrick. So during the past year, though, the stars have aligned. All four of those people had books come out in the last 12 months. And which was really exciting that they all launched them at the same time. The pandemic kind of slowed our ability to actually have in-person readings. So we waited until now and decided, let's just bring this to you virtually. Nikki is not able to join us tonight, unfortunately, but we were able to honor her earlier this year when we inducted her into the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame. So if you want to hear from her, you can definitely check out our Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame video and hear her give a special reading. But joining us tonight is our first featured reader, and that's Litha Kendrick. So Litha, please join me.
Hello.
Hi, Litha. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Jennifer?
I'm doing pretty good. Exciting that we're getting to do this event, where you're the reader, I'm the MC talking to you. We're actually getting to do a dual role here because we're going to set the stage for those people who may not have been at that February 7th, 2012 reading. So it's kind of fun. We get to share those duties together.
Right. Yeah.
So, well, let me tell our audience just a little bit about this. We planned that February 7th, 2012 reading a year in advance. So we really did not know UK was going to be playing that night. When we found out, we even said, should we cancel it? And we said, no, we've got too many people lined up. Let's just go forward with it. Even when our reading was just minutes away from starting, the room was one of the emptiest I'd ever seen it. And Letha and I, we looked at each other, and I remember she was saying, we laughed nervously, didn't we? I was like, yes, we did, because the reading's getting ready to start. We have all these empty chairs. And that's one of the rare things that just had never happened to us. So we were kind of worried about that. And, Letha wrote a very perfect description about what she remembers from that night in 2012. And so I wondered, Letha, would you mind sharing a couple of paragraphs from that?
Sure, I'd love to. So this is what I wrote in trying to remember what happened and how I felt and how it was that night. As time for the reading drew near, people began to trickle in, at first in ones and twos, and then in groups. Everyone bundled up against the cold, their faces rosy with it. There was a special quality in the crowd, a buoyancy and sense of camaraderie. Talk and laughter and warm breath filled the air with tales of how far away they had to park, how crazy the traffic was. As the room filled, Neil directed more and more chairs to be set out until finally the lobby and the circular desk, that old circulation desk in the old library, were completely surrounded by chairs. And still people came in high spirits, ready to appreciate and enjoy the readings and each other's company because they'd had to go through something to get there. The next morning, I was trying to catch a little bit of it in my journal, and I noted that when I stopped to think about it, all of Lexington's literary and cultural community, people from all different parts of the arts, had shown up that night. And as Nikki and Ed and Bobbie took the podium one by one and read, the crowd was so responsive. And I was struck by the fact that the people that were gathered there that night at the Carnegie Center were, in fact, a community. And in the Stewart Room that evening, we really, I felt, were all part of this kind of ongoing, living tradition that is Kentucky literature. It was just extraordinary. I won't ever forget it.
I agree. I mean, it was the first time we'd ever had 250 people come to a Kentucky Great Writers reading. And, we've had a lot of big Kentucky Great Writers readings, but we've not had any like that because it was just, like you said, people crowded everywhere, standing when there weren't any chairs left. And actually part of what made this event so legendary wasn't just that we had all these people, but it was also because it made the Carnegie Center realize that Kentucky writers will draw a huge crowd and we can do this. And we've had a lot of big readings since. It was actually one of the reasons why we moved our front desk. If you've ever been in our building and wonder why we moved it, this event was one of the ones that made us realize we've got to have more space for people to be able to attend big events. So it's definitely a legendary night for us for sure. And in a lot of ways, even though we're doing this virtually tonight, I think it's also going to be one of those special nights that we remember. The one thing I regret, and we were talking a little bit about this before the event started, is it's not the same as going to an in-person reading where you can go and you can hug people and you can talk with them and chat with them. And as you're sitting in the audience, you're hearing, people, sending up whoops and whistles and roars of laughter and clapping and, in response to what these readers are saying. And that's part of the magic, that you feel at Kentucky events like this. I've gone to literary events outside of Kentucky, and I'm always surprised at how, polite their clapping is compared to what we do, because our writers are our rock stars. But we've had a lot of good virtual events at Carnegie, and I think that tonight's going to be very special because we have a state full of amazing writers that can move us, engage our minds, and deliver an outstanding virtual reading. So we'll do some of that right now. And I'd like to introduce Letha because I know a lot of you all have seen the names of a lot of the people who are watching from home. And then, of course, we'll have lots of listeners on the radio as well. Some of you all know Letha, some of you all may not know Leatha Kendrick. So let me tell you just a little bit more about her. The Kentucky Great Writers Series is actually 12 years old now, and Letha was the MC for 6 of those years. So for half of this series' existence, she was the one giving author introductions, and she gave over 70 author introductions. Introductions that were so beautifully written and so thoughtfully prepared, that gave such depth beyond just what a normal writing of a bio is like, that it really set a very high standard for all literary events that Carnegie wanted to put on, because we saw what a really great introduction could be. And yeah, I remember one author told me after she had done her reading, she says, being selected for the Kentucky Great Writers Series and getting introduced by Letha Kendrick, that's when I realized I had been, I had finally arrived as an author. And so many authors, of all different genres and all different levels and, stages of their career have said that Letha's introductions have been quite an honor. So thank you for all of those that you gave for us. Um,
It was a joy. Yeah.
mhm. And, something that, in addition to her introductions, I mean, they had a very powerful effect, but so do her writing classes. If you don't know Letha Kendrick, she's been teaching at the Carnegie Center for 20 years, and she has some of the most popular and hard to get into classes of all the ones that we teach and offer. And she's also taught at local universities and a plethora of writing conferences all across the Southeast. And she authored a documentary on photographer Doris Ullman, and has been a book and editor of a book and magazine editor as well. So it's really no wonder that she's won awards and fellowships for her writing. Her published works, whether they are in anthologies and journals or collections of poetry, are ones that will be just as deep and thought provoking as her author introductions, and they are all so gorgeously written. Even the poems of loss and healing, which will tear your heart out sometimes. Her latest collection is And Luckier, out from Accents Publishing in April 2020, right at the start of the pandemic. And tonight she's going to read from this collection, or maybe some new poems, who knows? But whatever she decides to read, we will be the lucky ones. So I give you Letha Kendrick.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. What an amazing introduction that was. I appreciate it. And thank you to Neil and Sarah and Jessica and Marcia and all the people whose names I don't even know, and all the ones I have had the joy of working with since the time I first walked through the door of that beautiful old library at 251 West 2nd Street. Thanks to everyone really who has made this place where we're gathered virtually tonight, the Carnegie Center, the vibrant home that it is for writers. I miss the building. I really do. From the first time I walked in there, I felt like it sheltered me as a writer. It reverberated with the voices and spirits of readers and writers who'd been there for years. I looked forward to coming back to it, even as I almost cannot imagine actually being back inside its walls. We are all going to have to become comfortable with crossing thresholds, as I hope we get back really quickly to a new normal, and can be together and share the space and hear the voices and all the reactions to each other's work that have sustained me as a writer and as a teacher. Looking here because I had a copy of my book. Oh, here it is. I want to be able to show it. The first poem that I am going to read is actually addresses the barrier that a door can be. And I realized as I was looking for poems to read, I have written a few poems about doors, more than I had thought. So maybe I need to think about why that is. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's from my book, And Luckier. And I'll talk a little bit more about the book after I read the poem. So this poem is called Out the Door. It's getting out the door that stands between us and the world. I know, open the damn thing and step through. Broken promises are all that hold us, plans we made and then ignored. The mess in the house we're afraid will survive us. The quiet hours we'd thought to have. Access to the powers we felt as children near in us, now lost to lack of faith. The only thing that changes is the heart. There's the door. The dream kept the faith you dropped. Time arranges more second chances than they tell us. Clean breaks, old reservations waiting to be taken up. So hope I can listen to my own advice and get out the door when the time comes to move. But that poem is one of the poems that's collected in And Luck Year, my book that came out in 2020. And I'm showing it to thank Katerina Stoikova and Accents Publishing for this beautiful book, and for its coming out, Lynn Winter for the wonderful art on the cover. And I want to thank Katerina also for all the ways in which she supports writers and helps to make our work visible and heard. She's another wonderful resource that Kentucky writers have, as the Carnegie Center is. So that means a lot. We are very lucky here. So I'm going to read the first poem from the book. And some of you may have seen this poem or heard it before, but when you talk about things that keep you from getting through the door, this is one of them. The poem is called Your Fear. Now ask yourself, who might it serve that you would grow downhearted? What do you choose to see? What will your seeing make? The news, selected and relayed, mirrored, and soon a billion times its weight, weighs on the mind that seeks it out. What is the new? The breath just drawn, the thought not yet enfleshed, the kind word being said, the stars that press unseen overhead. It is the unforeseen upon which Poe said we must calculate most largely. Impossible to separate misery and joy, the living edge of mystery. Time's unfolding dauntless holds you dear. The universe has no need of your fear. A lot of times this past year, I have felt a heaviness. I'm sure all of you have, the weight of events as they unfolded, the sadness of things, the separation from others. And now that we come through a year, I am feeling the weight of all the stuff here in this house that I've been looking at for a year, not to mention my own body weight, which seems to keep creeping up on me as much as I try to walk and keep it at bay. But it's kind of as if I'm physically carrying the news and a lot of the sadnesses and brutalities. But then, being the poet that I am, I'm wondering, what is weight anyway? Isn't it gravity? I mean, but what is gravity exactly? So this next poem is a new one, and it kind of represents one of my attempts to come to grips with gravity. So strangely enough, the title is Gravity. We can't explain gravity, though we track it down to the subatomic level, though we dissect weak attractors and pick our way into the disappearing heart of matter. It sticks everything together. You in the kitchen making coffee, me orbiting the heart of our long marriage, Solly waking up to the last day of the last week of school, each grandchild a planet spun off and shining in orbits invisible, elliptical. My feet under the desk, the weight of the suitcases we drag to the car, the drag on the tires, their grip that takes us where our children are. It's in our knees and feet breaking down, our diminished height as we settle toward the earth, coming in for some final landing. We don't even know how aspirin works, though that willow tree whose bark first offered relief is thousands of years gone. Maybe this sag of meat on bone is somehow too a hologram. Waves of energy shimmered into what we've mistaken for solid flesh. Oh, but I know the ache of being a body, the eager thrust toward a beloved other, the slow light of your smile when we wake. Sometimes the weight of everything drags us down, and sometimes we have a chance to dance. I'm for dancing. Don't get enough chances and forget to sometimes when I maybe could. So I'm kind of trying to remind myself to take those chances when they come. And we had one, Will and I, my husband, last January a year ago, but right before the pandemic shut everything down. A few years back, poet Jeff Worley, told me about the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. And so I checked it out and found out that another wonderful Kentucky poet, Nicole Brown, and her partner, Jessica Jacobs, are regular presenters there. So we decided to go. And I fell in love with how vivid and laid back it is. And right smack in the middle of the week, there's this dinner, a group dinner, and I call it a sock hop. You can't really call it a dance because that's too formal. So this past last time that we got to go, Joy Harjo was the headliner, and she was lighting up the place with her visionary poems and her reading with her saxophone and just all the joy that she brings in with her writing. And I will now always be able to say that I danced with Joy Harjo one night. Well, we all were dancing in the middle of an old gym. And that was the genesis for this poem that I'm going to read next, called Ode to My Left Knee. It is an ode to doing the thing we think we cannot do. And it's also, I realize, a thank you to the doctors and the nurses and the researchers and the scientists who find new ways to heal us and not only stay there by us, but cheer us on. So, Ode to My Left Knee. Ode to my left knee, who took me dancing Wednesday night, who leapt, cavorted, as though no one noticed. Oh, metal falseness. Oh, invisible prosthesis. Oh, feared addition to a scarred and scalpeled body. I greet you with the first light, warm under quilts and sheet, testing my limb. And oh, severed knee, disappeared, who ran in pastures, raced ahead and always fell in the same spots. Oh, knee I wore until you would not work, knee of blotched white scars, because I was that running child, because in middle age, the chemo robbed my feet of feeling, so still I fell and fell. Forgive me that I do not know where they took you when they sawed you off. Forgive your brutal and precise excision, your no doubt ignominious disposal. In some landfill or incinerator, the ghost of you calls to my gone breast, to the hips they took so I could walk again. O knee of now, O dear flesh, rushing down Atlantic Avenue, heedless, forgetting to be grateful. More than mere glue and gravity must cause this flesh to embrace you, this bone to claim your joinery. O leg made new, and not without those weeks of searing pain, those days the body tried to throw you out, even as I sweet talked you, be mine, be mine. O healed knee, O mystery of the urge to be whole. If I am lucky, I will wear you out as well. Huzzah. So I am happy that I was able to dance and able to celebrate it and share it tonight. I'm going to close this with a new poem, one that got started. I read a lot of books of poetry, wonderful books of poetry that were coming out last year. And I'm not sure if Leah Naomi Green's wonderful book, The More Extravagant Feast, came out last year, but that's when I read it. And it inspired this poem. So I'm really glad to be able to share some of these poems with you. And I'll close with this poem called All This Life Later, the epigraph from Leah Naomi Green's poem, It Will Only Be Love That I Love You With. Leah Naomi Green, Field Guide to the Chaparral. My newborn daughter's head rode against my shoulder, heavy as a moon, luminous. Fall stepped among the crickets singing, its cool and slender toes weighted flower stems that October. How could I believe I could decide on love when its flood coursed through my resistance like light, like death plowing toward me? All this life later, death plows me still and still I half refuse the light. My daughter, a moon risen, turned away toward her own daughter's running form. In this small late yard, a cricket saws its song from the bank of asters nearing autumn bloom. A second cricket answers, small churr in the zinnias, a grating grace. Love is always a decision, and everything depends on the tired hand that cups a heavy head, on the deliberate softening of the clenched jaw. Soon I will be a stone given back to ground, dust taken up by air. Though bits of me swirl deep in my daughter's daughter leaping forward, all I have is this: storms and hatred, fire and melting poles, this weight of love to cradle, to choose against the will that would set it all down. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Letha. Of course, you did not disappoint. Absolutely gorgeous, even in the darkest moments. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks a lot.
Now, on February 7th, 2012, the first person that Letha had introduced that night was Nikki Finney, who read from Head Off and Split, the poetry collection that won her the National Book Award for Poetry just the year before. And, you know, if anyone in our audience has not seen or heard that speech that she gave, that acceptance speech, I advise you to look it up on YouTube, because if you just Google YouTube Nikki Finney speech, that will get you to where you need to go. Because let me tell you, it will render you speechless. And when you listen to that, you will know exactly what I mean. In fact, that speech was so amazing that the MC for that night, John Lithgow, said that it was the best acceptance speech that he had heard for anything ever. And that speech was so impactful that it's actually now part of an exhibit at the Washington, D.C. National Museum of African American History and Culture. So that tells you a lot. This was a very profound speech that she wrote, didn't even practice, and then just read that night when she won. So it's pretty amazing. Now, at our 2012 Kentucky Great Writers reading, Nikki Finney, when she finished mesmerizing us with her poems, next we got to hear from Ed McClanahan, who sent us all in an uproar. He was reading a story from I Just Hitched In from the Coast. So Ed, will you come and join me? How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Jennifer.
I see from your shirt, you're one of our kick-ass Kentucky.
Absolutely, yeah. I couldn't let the opportunity pass by that advertise my affection.
Now, the night of that February reading in 2012, I don't know how much you were paying attention to the audience, because you just kept reading like nothing was going on other than just laughing occasionally yourself. But for the people at home who may not have been there, you know, I have never seen an audience react anywhere close to this at a literary reading like I did that night. And, you know, Ed gets up to the mic and he starts reading. And as his story progresses, hysterical laughter filled the entire room. It was echoing through the building, you know, and the more that he recounted the story that was from that collection, you know, and it was about a mischievous younger year kind of prank that they did, you know, the harder the audience laughed. I mean, people had tears streaming from their eyes. They were quite literally doubled over with laughter. And I have never seen this before, and I'm not even kidding. I saw somebody who was laughing so hard she actually fell out of her chair. So it was just hysterical. And, you know, and you just kept reading, like, you know, and we just kept getting worse, but it was fantastic.
It ought to be easier to do in this format to keep on going here.
Absolutely. You won't see the audience, but I'm sure we'll all be laughing with you tonight.
Well, I had a very good time that night. That was fun. And I do love, in particular, to read that story, which is called Great Moments in Sports, I believe.
Yes, that's the one.
And this little piece that I'm going to read tonight sort of takes off from that. It's an, another great moment in sports in a way. This is from a story called The World's Greatest Fungo Hitter, but it's a baseball term, of course. The story, the full title of the story is The World's Greatest Fungo Hitter, Ruminations on Memory, Mortality, and the Cincinnati Reds. And this story appears in my book, Not Even Immortality Lasts Forever. I love long titles, obviously. This is just one little passage from it. One more highlight, please, Ed. Just one more. Okay, since I insist, one more. For a couple of seasons in the late 1940s, the Reds employed a journeyman infielder named Jimmy Bloodworth, the grizzled veteran of a dozen major league seasons, though something of a banjo hitter. I'd seen his picture in the sports page. He was a ruggedly handsome guy, well into his 30s, with prematurely white hair and eyebrows as black as a pair of andirons, like Hopalong Cassidy's. So it comes to pass that in the final hour of a sweltering, steamy summer evening in the dog days of 1949, I'm at the wheel of my mom's still new Chevy sedan, happily chauffeuring myself home from a profoundly gratifying little late date assignation with my secret extracurricular squeeze, Yvonne, whose dropout boyfriend, Tommy, a coal truck driver, has gone to the mountains on his weekly run. And I'm easing the Chevy through downtown Maysville with the windows and wind wings open wide, catching the breeze, cooling my still somewhat dampish young self, while simultaneously airing out the back seat after the divertissements that Yvonne and I, in accordance with the imperatives of youth, enjoyed only a few minutes ago in that cozy accommodation. My heart, needless to say, is high. On the Chevy's radio, Wade Hoyt is describing what will shortly be the conclusion of a long desultory Reds game with the Chicago Cubs, their only serious rival for last place in the National League in what has already been, for both teams, a long desultory season. The Reds are batting. It's the bottom of the ninth. Score tied at something like 8-8. 2 outs, runners on second and third. And here comes creaky old Jimmy Bloodworth to the plate. Of course, Jimmy's no great threat, but the pitcher's due up next. So the Cubbies are electing to pay old Jim the rare compliment of walking him intentionally. Waite's familiar, creamy, smooth radio voice, in concert with my own imagination, brings everything before my eyes with a high definition clarity no television will ever match. The catcher comes out of his crouch and indicates where he expects to receive the pitch, chin high and a foot and a half outside, while Jimmy waits, patient and imperturbable, the bat resting on his shoulder. The pitcher pantomimes a full windup and indolently lobs the ball in the general direction of the targeted area, where it arrives in the catcher's mitt with a dispirited plop. Ball one, the umpire cries. Jimmy's watchful old eyes narrow. He appreciates the free pass, but he just don't care for this pitcher's laxy-daisy attitude somehow. As the next pitch sails past, he notes that its trajectory brings it just a little closer to him, perhaps, than the nonchalant pitcher intended. The bat twitches involuntarily on Jimmy's shoulder, as though it has a will of its own. But that ain't my style, old Jimbo tells himself. Ball two, cries the ump. The third pitch comes floating in as big as a cantaloupe, a scant 6 inches outside the strike zone, and slow enough that Jimmy can practically read the Rawlings trademark, so slow it almost seems to levitate before him like a thought balloon in the funny papers, fairly begging him to take a whack at it, which this time he does with impunity. He leans over the plate and swings with his arms extended, and the tip of his bat meets the ball a hair's breadth short of the catcher's mitt, and loops a soft, low-hanging liner just over the startled first baseman's outstretched glove and into short right field. The runner on third crosses the plate standing up, and this one belongs to the Reds. It was surely the capstone of Jimmy Bloodworth's diligent, worthy, largely unsung career. His payoff and glory for laboring season after season in the inescapable shadows of more gifted players. I'm sure there have been other instances of batters working a base hit out of an intentional pass, but I've yet to hear of one, and I hope I never do. In any case, it can never happen again, the ritual acting out of the intentional pass having recently been deemed too tedious for television. In my experience, at any rate, Jimmy's stroke of genius stands alone, and I'd sort of like to keep it that way. And because it happened within the very hour of my own initial visit to the Promised Land, I'm afraid I wasn't very good at it. I confessed to Yvonne many years later at a high school reunion. No, she said, but didn't we have fun? From that night forward, I've associated the modest heights Yvonne and I scaled with Jimmy Bloodworth's sudden elevation to the ranks of the obscure immortals. As to the latter, I dare say I'm once again the only living being on the planet who would bother to claim to have been, quote, present via Wait Hoyt for Jimmy's singular exploit, even as it was transpiring. Indeed, that I'm probably the only one who remembers that it happened at all, which is as it should be, I suppose, because not even immortality lasts forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. As always, you did not disappoint. Well, let me tell our audience just a little bit about Ed, just in case they're not familiar with who's this Ed McClanahan guy. Well, let me tell you, he is like no other. Ed is a wordsmith. He's a master of rhetorical questions. And as Publishers Weekly states, he's playful, self-deprecating, and wickedly sharp. And I think that we all got to hear that in the story that he just read. He's one of the University of Kentucky's writing programs, what they call the Fab Five, which includes Wendell Berry, the late James Baker Hall, Gurney Norman, and also Bobbie Ann Mason, who we're getting ready to hear from in just a few minutes. He was a Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford, where he joined up with a group of creatives who called themselves the Merry Pranksters. And that was headed up by the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest author, Ken Kesey. They actually dubbed Ed Captain Kentucky because he would not give up his accent even in California. That was part of who he was. And so I just love that part, that he kept his Northern Kentucky accent. He's published short stories in numerous magazines, and it must be true that some people actually do read the articles in Playboy, because Ed has won Playboy's Best Nonfiction Award twice. He's authored 7 books, including novels, short story collections, and novellas. And among those is the novella, The Congress of Wonders, which was adapted into a prize-winning short film. And also the University Press of Kentucky recently published a graphic rendition of Ed's novella, Juanita and the Frog Prince, with illustrations by J.T. Dockery, who's also a Kentuckian. So Ed was inducted in the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame in 2019, and he just read to us from Not Even Immortality Lasts Forever. And I will tell you, the cover gives this disclaimer. It says, mostly true stories. So thank you so much, Ed, for sharing that story with us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I appreciate it.
I remember that night in 2012. First, Nikki had mesmerized us. It had us in pieces, some of us on the floor with laughter. And then Bobbie Ann Mason brought us all together again, soothing us with her words and providing the perfect ending to the night. So, Bobbie Ann, could you join me now?
Hello there.
Hi. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I fell off my chair.
You were one of the many, huh?
No, just now.
Oh, I love it.
Listen again.
It's always great. Yeah. Now, I remember the night of 2012, you were reading to us from The Girl in the Blue Beret. And before you read that night, you were telling us that you were telling the audience that that book is based on your father-in-law's experiences in France during World War II. And that as part of your research, you went over to France, you toured the places where the novel was going to be set, but that you also had, you wanted to learn French. And so you came, I remember seeing you a lot at the Carnegie Center coming for French classes. So are you proficient in French?
Not exactly, no. I actually started taking French at the Carnegie Center in 2006. And my sister and I took a trip to Paris, yes. And then somewhere along the line, I could imagine my father-in-law in France, a young man just shot down his airplane by the Germans and having to hide and make his way and not knowing French. And as I was learning French, I got into his head trying to imagine what it was like during the war. And so that led me into The Girl in the Blue Beret novel. So taking French at the Carnegie was first.
I love that. I didn't realize that it was first. That's great. Yeah,
Oh,
I
yeah.
know of, a couple of authors actually who are taking French at Carnegie now because they're going to incorporate it into their books. So maybe you started a trend. I don't know.
Oh, so I need to get back to French. I had to quit a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, now it's virtual. So, but we'll be back in class in the fall. So, so I wanted to tell the audience just a little bit more about you, Bobbie Ann. You know, she drew us in that night with her reading, and I imagine she's going to do it again because her ability to transform a story into something that's more than just words on a page. I mean, under her guidance, words become lyrical. And, you know, I remember the first time that I met Bobbie Ann, I remember I was so surprised at how quiet her voice was because when you read her books, they are just so full of life and and her characters are so vivid. And, you know, she's the author of 16 books that include novels, short story collections, memoir, a biography of Elvis Presley, and literary criticism. And she has numerous pieces published in magazines and literary journals, including Atlantic Monthly, the New Yorker, and the Paris Review. And much of her writing is based on Kentucky and the lives of people that either she once knew and she is fictionalized, or maybe even, you know, fictional characters who live in a setting that she's known intimately. So her books definitely have a Kentucky flavor, and she brings readers to Kentucky through her imagination, which I love. She's won many awards for her effort, including the Penn Hemingway Award. And she's also a Pulitzer Prize finalist and has been shortlisted and longlisted for many awards, including the 2021 Penn Faulkner Award for Dear Anne, which we're getting ready to hear from tonight. But her first novel, In Country, became a movie in 1989 starring Bruce Willis and Emily Lloyd. And this book is still widely taught in classes. So sometimes the debut novel can really launch a career, and it did for her. Bobbie Ann was inducted into the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame in 2016. Now, Bobbie Ann's acknowledgement page for Dear Anne contains some very special people, and now we're going to get to hear from her. She's going to share some of those acknowledgments with us, and I think it's going to be so special hearing them in her own voice, along with, of course, an excerpt from her novel. So, Bobbie Ann.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to say that the book is dedicated to some familiar people, familiar to some of you, dedicated to Gurney Norman, Ed McClanahan, Wendell Berry and James Baker Hall. And and also in memory of the writing teacher we all had, Robert Hazel. And so I just wanted to say that as a love letter to them. When I was at UK in college, they had already gone on a few years before to Stanford University, and for a couple of decades afterwards, I would hear stories coming out of the West Coast because they knew Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters and the counterculture out on the West Coast. And that was fascinating to me. And so a question, I suppose, in the back of my mind over time was, what if I had gone to Stanford instead of going to the East Coast? How would I have been turned out differently? What would it have done to me? So that just started as a premise for my novel, Dear Anne. And at first I was going to write about a woman who did go to Stanford University. And then as I worked on it, I realized I was writing about a woman who was entertaining the question of what if she had gone to the West Coast. So Anne, in the present day, is looking back on her life in the 60s. And she would like to escape from whatever situation she's in at present. And so she asked herself, what if I had gone to California? What would that have been like? So she sets out trying to imagine it. And she wants to imagine it without the love of her life, Jimmy, in it. What if it had turned out differently? What if she had met different people? So she starts going back into the past and trying to create something in her imagination, but eventually her memories intrude. And so the real story takes place, but it seems to take place at Stanford University. She first arrives. The university was at the end of a long avenue lined with lofty palm trees. Anne drove slowly, the car creeping along as if it was too nervous about the ultimate destination of the cross-country journey. Halfway down the avenue, she pulled over. Stanford displayed itself lavishly in front of her, both tantalizing and threatening. The amount of wealth it held in its history was beyond Anne's imagination. The palm trees on either side of her made a path to Xanadu. It took her breath. She had not expected the campus to be so large and quiet and leafy. The giant oak trees splayed their limbs like lazy gymnasts. She saw trees that might have been redwoods, tall and gaunt, pinpointing the sky. She ambled through a grove of what she thought, from their fragrance, were eucalyptus trees. Their peeling bark lay shredded at their feet like ragged gowns. It was a grand and lonesome place, but she wasn't afraid of being alone. She was afraid of Ivor Winters, the prominent literary critic who would be her advisor. She had heard he was a curmudgeon and a rationalist. What would he expect of her? She was sure that a more backward bumpkin had never crossed the threshold of mighty Stanford University. So she is a timid kind of person who finds herself intimidated by all these high-powered graduate students and lit classes. She moves along in the story, and then Jimmy appeared. He isn't supposed to be here. She's thinking from the present. This is disconcerting to her, but there he is, and she can't unforget him. Jimmy sat across from Anne in the Kelly and Sheets class. That's what he called the seminar on the poetry of Keats and Shelley. That was probably an old joke, she thought later. Whenever she glanced up from her notebook, he was gazing across the oval table at her, but he lowered his eyes when she noticed him. Her heart did a butterfly caffeine flutter. He had long, shaggy hair like a poodle dog. Random ringlets framed his face. At the end of the class, he shoved his books into a green canvas bag and slung it over his shoulder before he moved in her direction. Which is your favorite, Kelly or Sheets? He asked. Keats, of course, she said. How can that be a question? She was trembling. Touché, he grinned. He had nice, even teeth. He was smoking a cigarette. They headed down the stairs. Where do you come from? I like your accent. Kentucky. Can you hear my accent? Yeah, can you hear mine? A little northern. Detroit? Chicago. He sucked in his cigarette and then blew little contrails out his nostrils. Tell me everything about yourself, he said. Everything? Sure. What was your first word? First tooth? Stuff from your baby book. The sunlight on the main quad was blazing. As if they had a destination, they headed toward Hoover Tower. She was glad it was her heretofore embarrassing accent he had mentioned instead of the fatuous remarks she had made in class about Shelley's wind poems. Sitting on the steps of Hoover Tower, she told Jimmy things about her childhood she wouldn't have expected to tell, about milking cows and cleaning manure from the barn. His childhood was Boy Scouts and Cubs games in suburban Dullsville, Illinois. He apologized for his humdrum history, which sounded alien to her. He smoked another cigarette. Let's walk, he said after a while. They passed the bookstore and the crazy green fountain. Jimmy crooked his elbow for her to take his arm. She liked touching him. He was tall, but not towering. He wore a nondescript brown duffel coat, a blue Oxford shirt, and twill khakis with an ink stain on one knee. His clothes seemed to be an undergraduate wardrobe he hadn't worn out yet. She liked his long, messy hair and the unself-conscious way he walked, a walk that meant confidence. And he wasn't top lofty like so many Stanford boys. His car was in the parking area near Tressiter Union. When they reached her car, he handed over her books. I'm going the other way, he said. See you in class. He waved a little goodbye. Anne was stunned. She felt as though an actor had stepped off the screen and taken her for a stroll through a make-believe El Dorado before slipping back into the celluloid. What movie? What actor? Actors were all suave with molded hair. Jimmy was something new. She bought an ashtray in case he ever came to her apartment. They're in his car. Jimmy turned onto Sand Hill Road in front of the shopping center. A man was guiding sacks of groceries on a rolling wooden platform to a car in front of the supermarket. A woman in high heels waited by her open trunk. Anne glanced at Jimmy, his strong hands guiding the wheel. She was stuck in a moment. Then Anne led Jimmy up the metal stairs to her door. He seized the quilt on Anne's studio bed. This is beautiful. Wow. He rubbed the quilt between his fingers. Magnolias. My mother made it, she said. It must have taken years, he said. Look at that stitch work. I helped her piece it when I was little. The quilt was supposed to be a traditional marriage quilt, but Anne had gone to college instead, and her mother gave it to her then, saying, "You'll need some cover in that dorm room." Jimmy traced a finger along a star in which she recognized the print of a blue dress she had worn in first grade. "I like the star," he said. "Far, far out." He laughed. "The things we say. Of course, as a star is far out. That's an astronomical term." Jimmy had a sort of long face and intense blue eyes that were a little droopy. His untamed hair fell in clusters onto his forehead. She was breathless just looking at him. "I want to know your mother," he said. "What would it be like if you took me there to your farm?" "It's nothing special. About 75 acres, some fields, a creek, an old farmhouse that didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 5 years old." "Could I ride a tractor?" he asked. "Or would it be mules? Did you wear a hoop skirt?" "How would I get a hoop skirt in the outhouse?" she said. He laughed. She was pleased to see him use her new ashtray. "I'm kidding," she said. "We didn't have an outhouse, at least not till after I was five, and nobody wore hoop skirts, too hot." Jimmy surveyed her tiny apartment, her piles of books, the cabbage rose rug, the fuzzy rough armchair. "Why don't you have a TV?" And she said, "It costs money, and why do I need a TV?" He shrugged. "I'm sorry. I was making assumptions. I thought everybody had one. We got a television when I was in high school, and then later I'd watch it with my daddy and little brother when I came home on breaks. Didn't your mom watch it?" "No, she couldn't see it from the kitchen." In those first weeks with Jimmy, they had fun just acting crazy, laughing together. She believed that falling in love could happen only once in life. Jimmy had a good voice, and he had a knack for remembering song lyrics. He could do Gilbert and Sullivan patter. He had played a policeman in a high school production of The Pirates of Penzance. In the car, he sang Beatles songs, stomping his left foot so vigorously in time with the tune that the car seemed to bounce. "I could have been a Beatle," he would say with mock braggadocio. He was unfailingly polite, always pausing at a threshold for her to enter before him, and always opening the car door for her. He even had the money to take her out to eat. At the International House of Pancakes, she ordered Swedish pancakes with lingonberry syrup because she had never had lingonberries. He seemed charmed by her delight over such simple indulgences, and he let her drive his Mustang, which thrilled her, especially the way it zoomed so quickly after takeoff. But Anne wasn't sure of Jimmy, really. Sometimes she didn't see him for days. He rarely telephoned, preferring to drop in unannounced. He hadn't actually said, "I love you." He didn't always speak directly. When he called her "my little tulip of the tundra" or "my rosebud of the Rubicon," she could not measure the depth of his affection. He had a way of teasing her, she thought, a way of leaving her hanging. Walking across campus together, he would suddenly disappear, just as he had at the protest march. She would turn bewildered, then realize that once again he was hiding from her. He found this hilarious, but she felt ridiculous, hunting for him behind doorways and trees, then finding him hunched behind a bush or in a shadow of an arcade. Once he was crouched like a tiger behind some lush grasses in an area of plantings between some tall tropical trees. Chip had given Jimmy some grass. Anne watched Jimmy roll it in a crisp little paper. not spilling a crumb. His carefulness and confidence inspired her to try it. The smoke was choking and vile, but she held it in as Jimmy instructed. Then, after a bit, it felt nice. It was a caffeine antidote, she thought. It was smooth, like pudding. What are you reading? She asked Jimmy. Snorri Sturluson and the Icelandic Eddas, he said. Aren't they a music group? No, that's Martha and the Vandellas. I can't tell the difference, she said. Eleanor Rigby could have been a poem in the Norton Anthology, said Jimmy. It's as good as any Edda you could name. Anne loved the way he spouted things out of the blue that she had thought of herself. She and Jimmy stared at the photo of the Beatles on the cover of Rubber Soul. The Beatles obviously had had their hair set on big brush rollers at a beauty parlor. It's teased, she said. In college, I had a bouffant, a beehive do. I'll bet you were cute, Jimmy said. I want to see a picture of you in a beehive. Take my word for it, Anne said. You don't want to see it. You're the most, he said. You're tops. She grinned. You're stoned. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, Bobbie Ann. This sounds like a fantastic book. I'm really glad to hear that part of it too. Even humor in it, which I was not expecting in that reading, but yes, I could hear it. So thank you to Bobbie Ann. Thank you also to Litha Kendrick and Ed McClanahan for your readings tonight. One of the things that I noticed as I was listening to all these is that, whether these authors were looking into the past or they were even thinking about the present, that, these readings were about identity, about who we are, where we've been, what experience and people that we've met and had, and even, the things that have shaped us and even what might have been. So it was really interesting, to hear these readings, and yet, we've all got these Kentucky themes in them, and, so many ways that these stories intersect. So now we will start with our questions and answer session. And so if you have a question, I'm talking to my audience. If you have a question, you can just drop it in the Q&A bubble there, and we will ask it in just a moment. But I would like to start with a question that all three of our authors can take turns reading or answering. And here's the question. If you were able to sit down with one person, living or dead, who mentored you, inspired you, or gave you the confidence to write, who would that person be and what would you say?
In my case, I'd say Bob Hazel, whom Bobbie mentioned, but he was a teacher at UK who taught all of us, Wendell, Gurney, Jim, Bobbie, and who was somehow or another not so much inspirational as motivational. He made us want to be him in a way, to be.
He was very glamorous.
Yeah.
He was glamorous and romantic.
Yes, he carried it all around with him.
He made being a writer a very romantic goal. And I'd never heard of people who were writers and hadn't written. And so that was very meaningful to me. There were a lot of drawbacks about Bob's role. But in the long run, I would have to say that I don't know what direction I could imagine of having taken if I hadn't taken his writing class.
I had been to Stanford the year before I was in Bob's class. I went to Stanford, tried to be a graduate student, and flunked out miserably. I flunked out in short. and came back to Kentucky, and that's where I met Bob. But I brought back stories about Stanford that I think maybe caused Bob to push everybody else to apply for Stegner fellowships. He basically made Gurney apply for one. And I think, well, Jim was there and found his way to a fellowship, but Wendell, of course, was Bob's protege too.
Mhm.
And
So what would you tell Bob Hazel if you could just have a sit down conversation with him? It doesn't matter that he's dead. This is just theoretically, but what would you say to him now?
what do you think about us, Bob? How you like them apples?
Oh, I have no idea. I think I would thank him because I never did.
Mm.
And Letha, what about you?
Well, you know, I went to UK a few years later. I had Wendell in a poetry seminar, but there were not creative writing classes then at UK. And I didn't take a creative writing class. I went ahead and got my master's. I took a 2-semester class with Wendell. That was very engaging about poetry, but I didn't think about it as something that I could do. I was in my late 30s and wanting to write, and had always written, in fact, but never really been in any kind of place where I was with other writers at all. And I was the development director for Jenny Wiley Theater in Eastern Kentucky, and was bringing writers in to work with teachers and students, and put on a weekend workshop and met Georgella Lyon and sat down with her. And I think we talked for 2.5 hours the first time that we talked. And from there, I was already writing and my own things, but then I started getting a little bit serious about it. So I didn't end up going to writing classes until I was around 40, and got my MFA when I was 45. So it was a whole different path. I did other things. I taught composition and public speaking and all kinds of things at the community college for a while, because we were in Prestonsburg. We were in Eastern Kentucky. So, yeah, and I talk to Georgella all the time, so I get to say thank you a lot. That I found a writing sister. And along the way, Gurney was an amazing inspiration too, just amazing. So
Kentucky really has a great literary community, a lot of support.
yeah.
Writers that you can just go up and talk to, and they give inspiration, for the people who haven't yet been published, and then you join their ranks.
Oh, and I should add, when Gurney went away to Stanford, we had an amazing correspondence, primarily about writing. And we were just so full of ideas about being writers and what to write about. And that certainly was one of the major encouragements that I ever received.
And Jim Hall too was a teacher when I came back and was taking creative writing classes, and encouraged me to go on too. So yeah, it was such a community and very welcoming and supportive. Yeah.
Now, for all three of you, you did graduate programs or an MFA program out of state. Letha was in Vermont, Bobbie Ann in New York, and then of course Ed in California. And so how has Kentucky shaped you as a writer that writing programs in other states didn't?
I never went to a writing program. I went to graduate school in literature. And so the only writing classes I ever took were Bob Hazel's 2 classes. And I went to a workshop. This was what helped turn the corner for me when in the late 70s, after many years out of college, I found this 2-week-long writers workshop in upstate New York. And there were like a dozen visiting writers, Joyce Carol Oates and Gail Godwin, people like that. And I went and got motivated to be a writer, or to really do what I'd always wanted to do, but hadn't really. And I went 3 summers, and I should say that 2 of my best friends were also in those workshops, and I think that they are watching as we speak. So hello, Corey and Karen. And so that was very valuable, to have those writing friendships and to meet other writers and to be motivated by what they were presenting there at the workshops.
Can I read you all a little portion of a paragraph here?
Absolutely.
This is kind of an answer to that question. When I first when I escaped from the University of Kentucky with a sleazy master's degree, I spent thereafter the next 4 years in Oregon teaching freshman comp at Oregon State College. And that was as formative a 4-year period as any I experienced. And I'll tell you, the reason is in this little paragraph. I was teaching at Oregon State. We're at Oregon State in that howling wilderness way up yonder in the upper left-hand corner of civilization as we know it. I had fallen into a nest of versemongers. Among my new colleagues were no fewer than 5 accomplished young lyric poets. I won't name them, but each of whom, like me, was teaching 4 sections of freshman comp, and each of whom was fairly bursting with the music of language. My new friends and I toiled by day down in the boiler room of language, parsing away among the gerunds and participles and infinitives. And then, in our time off, we reveled in its ineffable power. As a group, these were the best drinking companions I ever had. Remember that bouncy little 1950s animated cartoon character named Gerald McBoing Boing, whose every utterance was a sound effect, a lion's roar or a passing freight train, or the milkman's clip-clop, or an orchestral symphony? My Oregon poet friends, a voluble colloquy of Dylan Thomas's, were like Gerald. When they opened their mouths to talk, lyric poetry spilled forth, language resonant with metaphor and music. 2 or 3 times a week, we'd hit one of the downtown beer parlors after school, and the talk was always far more intoxicating than the beer. Sometimes it was like listening to birdsong, raucous and wild, but joyously musical in every semiquaver. Or, to try another admixture of metaphors, language was to these guys as pigment is to a painter, or stone to a sculptor, an almost palpable, almost living substance that was theirs to shape at will. So that was formative in another way, messing around with verbs and gerunds and participles. Kind of did something to me. I'm not sure. Maybe something awful. I don't know. But
I love that, Ed. That was great.
Yeah.
Letha?
I actually ended up going to get an MFA, or at least maybe what finally pushed me into it. I had been teaching at the community college, and I love teaching it. I've been teaching writing, it feels like all my life, but they were starting to ramp up their certifications that you had to have. So I needed to go and get a PhD if I were going to teach freshman comp at the community college. And I was like, well, I don't really want to get a PhD. Maybe I said an MFA is a terminal degree. They don't know that, but I can, it's true, and I can tell them that. So that's when I decided that I would go on and get an MFA, and I applied to low residency programs. I had kids at home, teenagers, and I couldn't just go off to college, but so I applied at Vermont College. I was really hoping that I would get in because I loved the program, and I had amazing mentors, and I got to go. And so I was the one with the strange accent. When I got up there, like in Bobbie Ann's book, I was kind of the one sitting there going, oh gosh, but some people liked the accent. Most people just kind of thought, oh gosh, where'd she come from? Anyway, there ended up, one of the luckiest things about that was Sina Jeter Naslin was on the fiction faculty there. I was in the poetry program, but she was there when I was there. And so there was another person from Kentucky who was a wonderful mentor to lots of writers, and a wonderful teacher who was there at the same time. So wonderful.
That's great. Oh, I loved all your answers, all of you. I mean, this has been really fun getting to talk to you all about, the writing days, past and present. And, thank you so much for sharing, your works with us tonight, your new books, your new pieces that aren't yet published, possibly some of the new pieces from Letha, who knows. But I did want to say to our audience at home, do not forget to buy their books. You can go to the bookshop link that Brittany has pasted into the chat window, or you can go, if you're listening at home, it's www.bookshop.org/shop/Carnegie Center. So thank you all so much who attended. Thank you all so much who participated. I wish that we were able to hang out, get the last of the coffee, sign books, sign posters, and do all the things that we usually do when we're in the building. But it was still so great to see your faces today. So thank you all so much. I miss you all.
Miss you too.
Yeah. Take care.
Fun, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you. You did a great job. Thanks.
Thanks. You all have a good night.
Thanks.
Okay.